Okay, so you've probably already heard a lot about critical thinking in your academic career, and I include high school and before in that. You're going to hear a lot more in your academic life now, in college, and beyond, and even in most jobs, because this is a skill that is in high demand. And one of the reasons it's in high demand is because it's not necessarily common that people actually understand the process and put it in practice enough to get good at applying that process. Now, this is one of the things that you talk about going through college and the skills that you learn. Critical thinking is one of those things that you build as you go, and you can't necessarily pick like, oh, well, that's that class that I really mastered critical thinking. It's something that develops as you go, and it's not necessarily easy to pick out when that happened. And maybe later in life you look back and say, oh, well, okay, I was able to work through this process, and a lot of that was due to what I learned in college. So those are one of those things that sometimes it's the benefit of a lot of hindsight before you recognize that you've developed it. That doesn't mean that we can't think about this, use our self-reflection skills and our ability to think through this to build that process. So I'm going to go through the actual process itself. Now, this isn't every step that you could go through, but it does I want you to ask some of these questions of sources or situations or problems. This critical thinking process will help you. So the first thing is, what is the issue really about? Or if it's a chapter reading or an article, or maybe someone's speech, or even an instructor's lecture, what is it really about? Part of that is that you've asked the right questions. You know what kind of questions you can ask to find out what it's really about. But also that you know that you have to gather the correct needed data or information that's associated with that in order to know what the issue is really about. So that's that first step. Asking yourself, do I really know? The next one is, in some ways, a matter of terminology, in the sense of, do I understand the terms they're using? For instance, if someone uses the term family, we have this idea of, okay, father, mother, relationships, but we use family in a lot of different ways beyond that. Our friends is this idea of family, and a family community. So that's just one term out of many that can be taken lots of different ways. So that really goes back to this question of, what is the person or the source really saying? And making sure that you understand the words that they're using and the context that they're saying in it can be important for that. So that's the second question. Also, when it comes to an issue, what are your options? Is there a side? Are there sides to an issue? Is it something that there's conflicting opinions and reasoning about it that has this idea of sides and one that you need to take? Are there certain consequences to taking a certain side? And if you're thinking critically about an issue, you should probably know what the consequences are for each, not just necessarily the one that you think you'll go towards. Part of the reason for that is, especially when you start writing essays and having to make arguments, if you can understand the opposite side, or even a differing opinion, you can better argue your own opinion, because you set that up as an example of the opposite, and then you can talk about it and reason through why it's not correct. And it's pretty common for that to therefore better support what you're talking about. In order to do that, you need to understand the other side of it. There's something else that is circumstantial validity. Another way of saying that is it something valid or true only in a certain circumstance or situation? In other words, does the context or the situation around it really important on whether it's true or untrue, or something that should be done or not done? Is there circumstantial validity? Also, how reliable is your information? I went back from the beginning. I said that you need to be able to know what information and sources and data that you need to gather in order to make an informed decision about something or pick a side, etc. But is what you've gathered reliable? So you have evidence to back up your position, you have sources, but how reliable are those sources? We'll talk about that. I'll give some tips for checking reliability also in this module. Associated with this, since we're talking about wider academic success, we don't have exams in this class, but you will definitely have exams and at some point an essay question. So as part of this, think about that critical thinking process as a way that you can also apply it to essay question exam prep. So what you should be considering is, what is the question really asking? And sometimes you get exam questions in advance, and so you can ask these questions a bit before you actually go into the exam. But if not, you can go through this process before you start writing. What is a question really asking? Do you understand what it's asking you? Because if you don't, you may respond in a way that is not won't be valid or won't be part of that context. It won't be what the instructor is actually asking you if you don't understand what the question is actually asking. Now, what do you know? What are your beliefs? Where do you start with this? Are there arguments against your point of view? And what are they? Again, if you want to make an argument, you need to know the other sides. And what are the most important pieces of evidence? This is really, really, really critical for effectively answering essay questions. You need evidence. And if the more detailed you can be, the more likely you're going to improve your essay grade. So again, that's all part of that. You can think about the critical thinking process as something that you need to apply even on exam questions. In a lot of ways, this is also a process that you go through when you write essays, not necessarily just for exams. We'll continue talking about critical thinking, but this is just one way that you can ask questions and think about it as a process.